This video is brought to you by mybookie.ag. We are finally here at UFC 280 happening at Abu Dhabi. The card is actually going to start 8 hours before the usual time. So I know some people think that the main card is going to be starting at the usual time. It's 8 hours before, or should I say 2 p.m. Eastern, and you could just convert that. The card is amazing. From pretty much bottom to top, the first fight is whatever, but Muhammad Makhachev early on the prelims is one of two the biggest prospects in MMA right now. And you have a bunch of Khabib's family members and friends on the card. Abu Bakr and Zuba, Islam Makhachev is in the main event. It looks like, I don't want to say it's Khabib's shadow, but his relation to the card is very strong. He's going to be cornering 3 fighters on the card, and we know that his record is undefeated as a coach. So that is something that's going to be very interesting. But the main card itself is heavy with talent and good matchups. Even the Katlyn Chookagian and Mana Fiorot fight is something that I'm looking forward to as well, because I think Fiorot, if she's able to get past Chookagian, most likely is going to get the next title shot. And she could be a problem to Valentina Shevchenko. Given her power, her size, she's hard to take to the ground, she's great in the clinch. She's a fighter I've been keeping my eyes on for a while now. So that's going to be an interesting one of how she's able to deal with the puzzle that is Katlyn Chookagian's footwork and her distance striking. Beneil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot is an insane fight. This could be a bit of a grappling match, or it gets completely negated and both guys decide to strike with each other. And I know a lot of people are riding with Gamrot. A lot of people don't see much chance for Dariush in this one, but people cannot sleep on Dariush's power on the feet and his overall grappling skill. Petr versus Sean O'Malley is something that can surprise a lot of people, or it's just going to prove everybody right. A lot of people believe that Jan's just going to run right through him, but there's a lot of factors in that fight that shows that O'Malley for sure has a much bigger chance that people are predicting. And we're talking about 3 rounds, we're talking about a speed advantage starting early versus a slow starter in Jan. There's a lot of interesting factors in this fight for Sean O'Malley. And then the 2 title fights, Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. These two are going down as some of the greatest bantamweights of all time. I know a lot of people don't look at Sterling as such, but when you look at the guys that he has beaten, you for sure have to look at him as potentially top 5 greatest bantamweights ever. And TJ is in the running. If you want to look past his PED thing, you can even argue that TJ is the greatest bantamweight ever. So there's a lot of greatness on that fight. It's a very important fight, not only for who's going to become the champion, if Aljamain defends it or TJ recaptures it again and becomes a 3-time bantamweight champion, the first in history, but also this is big for their legacy in terms of adding that guy's name on their own record. And then of course the main event, it's the fight of the year. I rarely get this excited for a fight. Even though both guys are not trash talkers, they're not like mega stars like Conor and Khabib, they don't have that kind of beef going on. There's something else about this fight. It's that pure competition. Who is the best? They want to prove it against each other, and man, these two may in fact be the best lightweights in the world when it comes to their skills, and they're meeting each other in their primes. You normally don't see that. So the prospect of the night is definitely going to be Muhammad Makhachev. He's 22 years old, one of the most well-rounded fighters in the flyweight division already, and this may be his hardest test to date. Malcolm Gordon has some wins in the UFC, he's gone against some veterans already, and he has a fairly unique and well-rounded style that by itself could give someone as technically sound as Makhachev some issues. But I do expect Makhachev to one day be a champion in the flyweight division or the bantamweight division if he gets too big, because he is 5'7", which is relatively tall, and he's only 22 years old. The fighter of the night is for sure going to go to Charles Oliveira. All eyes are on the champ, or at least the uncrowned champ. He really is the champ, let's be honest here. And if he beats Islam Makhachev, there's going to be a lot of arguments, a lot of debates as to Oliveira being the greatest lightweight of all time, surpassing Khabib. He's also going to tie the record of Tony Ferguson and Khabib with 12 wins, and also captures the belt, becomes a 2-time lightweight champion, the only ever in history. There's a lot of achievements for Oliveira to claim with a win here against Islam, and of course he's the biggest star of the whole card. The banger of the night, the most explosive fight, and it's going to be really fun. I'm going to have to look at Zubaira Tukhugov versus Lucas Almeida. These two guys are finishers, a lot of power in the stand-up. Zubaira is pretty hard to take to the ground. He could try to take Almeida to the ground, but Almeida is capable down there as well. That fight is going to be all action. And then the fight of the night is for sure the main event. Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev, 2 of the most skilled fighters in the whole card, 2 of the best grapplers in the entire UFC going at it. You're rarely going to ever see a potential grappling exchange like you will with Oliveira versus Makhachev. And with that, let's go right to our first fight, Belal Muhammad versus Sean Brady, which is going to headline the prelims. I'm going to be honest here, it's probably not going to be that fun. Belal and Sean Brady will just do enough to win at times, and it definitely showed in Brady's last fight against Michael Chiesa and Belal's pretty much entire career so far. Ride it out to a decision, use their grappling as an advantage to hold the opponent down, and move away from a lot of shots. Sean Brady's a lot more heavy on the front foot, whereas Belal is very heavy on the back foot. He's always moving away and scaling the cage, and Sean Brady's definitely going to look for his power shots on the feet, overhands, hooks, all of that, but he just doesn't have a lot of output. He doesn't throw a lot of strikes, which could leave a lot of space for Belal Muhammad to just throw some shots out there and maybe just win rounds doing that. Sean Brady's for sure going to look for the takedown, and I think he could get a couple. Belal's a hard guy to take to the ground, at least statistically. He has a 91% takedown defensive rate, but Sean Brady's double leg takedowns are so strong. He was able to easily overpower Michael Chiesa, who was trying to defend those, and Michael Chiesa is bigger than Belal, and he made it look easy whenever he shot in on him. And here's the thing as well, Belal Muhammad is a purple belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whereas Sean Brady is a black belt, and it definitely shows in their fights. Belal may have more refined wrestling skills. He may be better to transition out of positions using his pure wrestling, but Sean Brady's definitely going to have the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu advantage. He's definitely going to try to get the back like he does against everybody. He is so quick to get it, and he forces opponents to give it up to him. But can Belal take Sean Brady down, and more importantly, does he want to do it if he can? We haven't really seen Sean Brady on his back too often. Michael Chiesa took him down, and I believe he got into side control on top of him, but that's Michael Chiesa, who's way better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu than Belal Muhammad. But Belal definitely has the opportunity to shoot in takedowns and at least mix it up. But at the end of the day, it's really hard to call. This fight can go to Belal, it can go to Sean Brady. It just depends who's going to be busier. Both guys don't generally do a lot of damage in their fights. Sean Brady is really good at getting dominant positions, so if he does take Belal to the ground, he could purely win the fight off of getting the back, and that's it. And that's what makes this fight a bit of a chess match and a hard one to predict, because Belal can do enough on the feet to win rounds as long as he can stop Sean Brady from taking him to the ground. And Sean will throw out some big power shots and maybe one lands, but Belal had the experience of fighting Vicente Luque and Wonderboy Thompson, and they couldn't do that to him. Specifically, we're talking about the rematch with Vicente, because the first one he got knocked out. So my final prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Sean Brady purely on getting good positions on Belal and being so defensive on the feet that all he's going to do is pressure Belal backwards and shoot in on him. As long as he can get Belal backing up, that's enough for him to at least shoot in takedowns and try to get it to the ground using his own strength. So I'm going to go with Sean Brady definitely by a decision win. And then we go to Beneil Dariush versus Mateusz Gamrot. Gamrot fighting a top 6 fighter is something I've been waiting for a while, and he's coming off a fresh win against Arman Tsarukyan, which didn't happen that long ago. But Neil's been taking a bit of a time off, so there's a bit of an advantage on that. Gamrot's been active, and technically speaking, Gamrot is better than Dariush in a lot of areas, especially when it comes to the stand-up and the pure wrestling. I mean, Gamrot was wrestling with Arman and getting good positions on him. If anything, Dariush can contest with Gamrot when it comes to pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which he has a much more traditional style. Gamrot has that as well, but his wrestling skill is extremely energetic, for a lack of a better term. But it's going to be very hard to see Beneil actually get in on Gamrot and take him to the ground and control him. And just like I said before, when it comes to overall striking, Gamrot is just leaps ahead of Dariush in most areas. Generally speaking, there isn't a lot for Dariush in that, unless he makes it a brawl. He does lunge out there with big left overhands and stuff like that, but Gamrot's seen that plenty of times already, and even fought someone like Guram Kutladze, who makes Dariush look like he just started striking. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Mateusz Gamrot, and I'm going to go by a decision win. It's hard for me to see him knocking Dariush out, getting him on the ground, finishing with ground and pound. Beneil is so crafty on the ground. Even if he is getting beat, the last thing he's going to allow is for Gamrot to get that position to finish him. And then we go to the fight a lot of the fans are looking forward to see if that young prospect can finally prove himself against the elites. Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. Right off the bat, everybody's already riding with Petr Yan to destroy Sean O'Malley in the fight, but you have to bring into account this is 3 rounds, and Petr Yan is a slow starter, with Sean O'Malley being a fast starter with a lot of power in his hands. Because of that dynamic alone, this is a dangerous fight for Petr Yan. Unless he starts quicker than usual, but then again, he generally needs that first round to figure you out, download the data, then pick you apart in the later rounds. So if he starts too quick without actually gathering any information, he can get a little too offensive and leave himself open. But generally speaking, Petr Yan is potentially the best boxer in the whole UFC. He has dealt with some amazing strikers already, like Jose Aldo, Corey Sandhagen. Corey Sandhagen is actually a very similar opponent to Sean O'Malley when it comes to his dimensions, like his height, his reach. He switches stances as well. He's a striker, and he throws all different kind of strikes as well. He's very athletic. It's a great fight to look at when you want to analyze Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. The differences between O'Malley and Sandhagen are, even though Sandhagen is tall and long, a lot of his stuff come in close range. He will set up combinations, pivoting off on angles and stuff like that, while not being too far away from you. Everything about Sean O'Malley is long. His strides are long when he's moving around the cage. His punches come from longer ranges than Corey Sandhagen. His kicks also come from longer ranges than Corey Sandhagen. And he also wants to keep his opponent at that range at all times. Sandhagen is a lot more flexible with his range. Most of his best work actually come in close, but he's extremely dangerous on the outside as well. And also O'Malley throws singular punches. He generally doesn't put together long stretch out combinations like Corey Sandhagen, 5-punch combos and stuff like that. He usually throws one big punch at a time or a strike to set it up first. Now this could be interesting because if he comes out the gates with something big like that, he could cause a flash knockdown on Petr Yan because he's not generally trying to set up a whole lot. So if he can catch Petr Yan before he gathers any information, things can get pretty dicey quickly, and that's a bit different than what Corey Sandhagen was trying to do against Petr Yan in the first round. Sandhagen came out very fast, and he knew that he had to. But there was a lot of combinations, a lot of movement, a lot of angles, generally a whole lot of setups for Petr Yan to get used to, download, and then exploit later in the fight. O'Malley's not going to give a lot of stuff out there like Sandhagen did before he throws the big punch, and potentially something can happen really early in the fight. And looking at the judging criteria, damage will trump everything, so if Petr Yan doesn't get things together quickly, he could start to lose rounds before he actually gets on the offensive. Right, if he only starts to dominate the third round, he potentially could just lose the first two because O'Malley just did more. That's a big possibility in this fight as well. But ultimately speaking, Petr Yan has the light kicks. O'Malley doesn't defend a whole lot of kicks. He's doing it more recently, especially shown in his Pedro Munoz fight. But he's almost got hit by every single leg kick that got thrown his way so far. I think statistically, he's got hit by nearly like 70% of leg kick or some crazy stat like that. Petr Yan also has the side kicks to the knee to do a lot more damage, and his in-close boxing is going to give O'Malley a lot of problems if O'Malley's not able to create those necessary exits. The exits also are going to be dangerous if he starts getting away on sharp angles, because Petr Yan comes down there with shift combinations and those hooks have wide arcs to them, and Yan may have some success blocking punches, parrying them, and then countering while he's getting moved back or sitting in the center, but he'll have a lot more success if he's pushing O'Malley backwards so he can potentially cut him off on those angles. Attacking O'Malley on the center line is not going to be the most efficient, so the center line are going to be most of his setups. The angles are where he's going to land a lot of his damaging shots. And there's always the opportunity for Petr Yan to take this fight to the ground, which you don't see too often, but he has shown in the past to be a very good offensive wrestler, which he has shown against Douglas Silva de Andrade, as well as Aljamain Sterling the first time. So there is that path if the strikings get a little dicey for him, and because of that, I ultimately will have to predict that Petr Yan is going to win this fight. I think it's a lot more dangerous of a fight than people think, but ultimately I see him pulling ahead, defending a lot of the shots. He has very sound defense in almost every aspect of striking. The only time he can kind of leave himself open is when he's lunging forward, reaching it for his punches, which I could see Sean O'Malley actually countering him doing that. But ultimately, I have Petr Yan winning this, and I'm going to go by a third round TKO. I think eventually the damage is going to be a bit too much on O'Malley, and I see him crumbling under that, getting finished with ground and pound shots. And then we go to the co-main event. The first title fight, Aljamain Sterling versus TJ Dillashaw. I am super excited about this one. And I'll have to say right away, stylistically, just purely off styles, TJ has a major advantage. Not only is he on paper the far better striker in almost everything he does, he's also on paper the better wrestler, and he's very capable with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in case the fight does go to the ground. The only guy that was able to consistently take him down was Dominick Cruz. And Dominick Cruz has very awkward shots at weird angles with his unique footwork. It's always a puzzle for the first time to fight him. And Aljamain Sterling is definitely getting a lot better with his wrestling. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he gets a really good double leg in there. But the pressure TJ Dillashaw backwards, box someone like that in who moves as well as he does, switching stances at all times, which is going to throw off a lot of takedown opportunities, and take him down, it could be too much to ask for unless TJ definitely shows his age in this one. He fought Corey Sandhagen, he definitely looked older and slower, and then suffered a knee injury in the fight, taking a year off for his comeback. 36 at bantamweight is very old, especially with the stuff he's coming off, like the injuries and the layoffs and all of it. Age is probably TJ Dillashaw's biggest opponent in this fight, because I can absolutely see the scenario if TJ comes in here correctly, that he shuts down all the takedowns, completely outstrikes Aljamain Sterling on the feet, defends most of the shots and counters most of them because of his footwork advantage, winning rounds into an eventual, either a decision or a late TKO finish. Sterling is going to have to pinpoint his takedowns better than ever before, because this is not Petr Yan. Petr Yan has good takedown defense, but he's generally a plotter. You can find the angle, which means you can find the opening a lot easier against someone who's kind of standing still and holds a really high, tight guard. TJ will oftentimes, especially against someone he knows that's going to try to take him to the ground, he will keep his hands relatively low, as well as switching stances all the time and moving all over the place. And Sterling, even though he has frustrating offense to deal with because of his range and awkward angles that he throws punches from, and constant kicks that nobody really wants to catch because they don't want to take him to the ground or get caught in a submission, his defense could be pretty wide open. Arms are pretty wide, no real guard at times, and for someone who can cut angles really quickly, at least theoretically they can find these shots to land a lot easier. So ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I am going to go with the underdog. I'm going to go with TJ Dillashaw, and I'm going to go by a 5th round TKO. But the thing is, if Aljamain does take this fight to the ground, Dillashaw's in some deep trouble, man. This is a different kind of grappler that he's used to facing. I can see Dillashaw giving up his back as soon as he gets taken to the ground, and Aljamain capitalizing on it. So that is why this fight is very hard to predict, because at any point Aljamain gets the takedown, and knowing that Dillashaw is not generally a one-shot knockout artist, there's always that chance that Aljamain could just turn this fight all the way around or dominate if he gets an early takedown in the round. So again, I'm going to lean to TJ Dillashaw. I'm going to go with that 5th round TKO, but this one should be pretty close. And then we go to the main event, the fight we've all been waiting for. Charles Oliveira versus Islam Makhachev. I cannot wait for this, man. And I'm so glad it's happening earlier in the day so I can watch it faster. I've talked about the fight plenty of times on multiple podcasts, multiple breakdowns. We pretty much know the gist of this. Charles, with the path of least resistance at least, he wants to keep the fight standing. He can grapple with Islam, but that's Islam's strong suit. He has a clear advantage when it comes to the striking. Islam is explosive, he is fast, he's a big guy, and he can generate a lot of power moving forward. Historically speaking, Charles Oliveira does not really move his head, so I could see even chances that Islam can catch him with some big punch, especially if Oliveira at all starts to worry about the takedown. But in everything else, man, Oliveira has a way better chance of winning on the feet. Firstly, he has a lot more power than Islam. He has a much longer reach. His pressure is something that Islam really hasn't dealt with before. And they both are going to be opposite stances, where Oliveira is for sure going to hand trap for the majority of the fight to find his long-range strikes, and Islam's going to have to find opportunities to find his takedown behind that, or potentially try to find a clinch opportunity, then work for the takedown if he tries to reverse it into the fence using Oliveira's pressure against him. And that's a major thing here. Oliveira is going to be very intelligent with his pressure, not reckless. A lot of people think he's reckless with it because he's always moving forward at the opponent, but that's not necessarily true. He did it against Dustin Poirier many times, where he kept him on the back foot, hand trapping him, keeping him on the end of that reach, and even catching him with multiple long right straights. There could be opportunities for head kicks like I talk about in my breakdown if he forces Islam to move at a certain direction, because remember, Islam's defense is always to move away from the punch. So if a straight is coming down the center line, he's moving away on the center line. If a hook is coming, he's moving that same direction on the same angle away from the punch. This can get relatively easy for someone to set a trap to get him to fall into a certain strike. So Oliveira could throw a left hook into a right high kick, or a right straight into a right high kick. Something of that kind of game plan here. It doesn't even need to be a high kick, it could be a intercepting hook. There's a lot of traps that Charles Oliveira can set up here, knowing the way that Islam moves. He has a very similar rhythm to everything he does in the stand-up. The worst case scenario for Charles Oliveira is if Islam actually pressures him back. Now he's in a bit of a dicey situation because Islam can easily use the cage against Oliveira, but the thing about the clinch is, Oliveira is very capable there. He has great knees, great control, can choke you out at any point, can dive in for Kimuras and crazy stuff like that. But in the scenario he does get taken to the ground, this is where Islam is definitely going to have the advantage in the fight, because I can absolutely see where Islam controls Oliveira, shuts him down, doesn't do anything too crazy, just keeps a lot of top pressure and forces Oliveira to go for things, jump up for triangles and arm bars, and Islam could potentially use those opportunities, use those openings to pass through into better positions, and then start to land ground and pound shots, and then try to chase submissions himself the longer the fight goes. Early in the fight, it's going to be hard for Islam to find a submission, in my opinion. It'd be crazy if he did. The later the fight goes, especially in the championship rounds, which is actually a place that Islam has been at, where Oliveira never has, that's where a lot of fans could be worried that Oliveira gets submitted. The pressure becomes too much, the ground and pound starts to settle in, soften up Oliveira, and then eventually finding a submission after Oliveira's going for a bunch of crazy stuff, opening himself up. But the way the fight gets to the ground is very important, because like I talked about before, the doubles and singles, blasting out there with takedowns from a distance, is something that Oliveira can use to his advantage to choke out Islam. He has one of the nastiest guillotines we've ever seen before, and it's very quick. I always bring up that Kevin Lee example. It's a great one to look at. As soon as Kevin Lee went in for the single leg, the fight was over. But the thing about Islam, different than Kevin Lee is, he has a lot of different ways to take you to the ground. There's a lot of trips, throws, slams, a bunch of things he can go to in the clinch rather than shooting it from a distance. But Oliveira is going to want to force him to shoot from a distance. And the way he could do that is by a suffocating kind of pressure, as well as stalking him against the cage, sniping him with good long shots. it forces out these kind of panic takedowns from Islam that Oliveira can find the choke on. So here comes my prediction. I've been very conflicted with my prediction on this fight. I've bounced back and forth a few times. Most of the time I have favored Islam Makhachev to win because I do think that his style can be relatively abusive and suffocating in these kind of fights, holding the opponent down and controlling them for the most part, even if they're going for crazy submissions and stuff like that. But the more I actually analyze the fight, the more I look at the performances and everything they did previously, it makes me believe in Charles Oliveira's chances a lot more. Oliveira just looks like he's too dangerous. Yeah, he could be losing the majority of the fight, but everything he does is to finish you, and I don't know if Islam has the ability to finish off Oliveira that quickly. So before the 4th and 5th rounds, there's a lot of stuff coming at Islam that he's never seen before from the greatest finisher in UFC history. He can knock him out with one punch. He can find kicks and knees and elbows, jumping kicks. We always forget about those. Knees in the clinch, elbows in there, submissions on the feet, submissions on the ground at any opportunity. Oliveira never lets up. He's fighting at a crazy pace to finish you off. And also this crazy scenario that doesn't seem as crazy when you look at the Thiago Moises fight is Charles Oliveira taking Islam Makhachev down. If that were to happen, this fight is pretty much over. If Oliveira takes Islam down, and what we've seen from Islam previously in the Arman Tsarukyan fight as well as the Thiago Moises fight, he gives his back up right away just like a wrestler does. And as soon as that happens, we can absolutely see Oliveira get his back and choke him out. So it's crazy to think as well that Oliveira has a lot more things to go to. And this is why the fight is so hard to predict. Because are you riding with Oliveira finishing him in the first 3 rounds? Or is Islam just too controlling, too strong with his wrestling and shuts down everything Oliveira attempts in order to finish the fight on the ground? And here's the thing that Islam said about Charles Oliveira. Yes, he's very pressuring. A lot of guys can't deal with it because they're not trying to take him to the ground. I mean, Kevin Lee tried and he got submitted for it, but he's mostly true with that. Oliveira's never dealt with someone whose game plan was to take him to the ground, at this level at least. So how does that change his style? How does that change his pressure and aggression? And then we have to bring up the whole experience factor. Oliveira's been fighting the best in the world for a long time, and Islam really hasn't. Islam has just gotten to this level for the first time. So the performances that he was able to put on were against much, much lesser competition, like so much lesser than what Oliveira has been facing. And ultimately that goes to my prediction for this fight. I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira. And the reason why I'm switching it to Charles Oliveira from my last early prediction is because of all these factors. I think at the end of the day, to sum it all up, Oliveira just seems too dangerous with everything. So I'm going to go with Charles Oliveira, and I'm going to go by a 2nd round TKO. I think he eventually finds some good right hands in there and then puts Islam Makhachev down with either a head kick or a hook. And as you can see from the odds, Islam is still a pretty big favorite over Charles Oliveira. Remember before when the odds first came out, Islam was like a 4-1 favorite, which was crazy. That was probably the best time for any Charles Oliveira fan to go and bet on him. But still, there are great odds if you go to mybookie.ag, where it looks like Oliveira is becoming a smaller underdog over time. More people are putting money on him, and if you're looking to put money on Oliveira, it's better now than to wait longer. Not only that, Aljamain Sterling's a pretty big favorite over TJ Dillashaw. That's an interesting fight to look at. I did pick TJ to win, but like I said before, Aljamain definitely has a big shot of winning that one. And Petr Yan, almost a 3-1 favorite over Sean O'Malley. Mateusz Gamrot being a big favorite over Beneil Dariush, minus 188. The rising contender against the veteran. And I'm very surprised they have Fiorot being over a 2-1 favorite over Caitlin Chookagian. It seems like a lot of people are riding with the prospect here, or at this point she is a contender. Volkan Oezdemir is the underdog against Nikita Krylov. I don't necessarily agree with that one. Nikita Krylov makes a lot of mistakes in fights, even though he is more well-rounded than Volkan. Volkan definitely has higher fight IQ, and I believe could make Nikita Krylov pay in many moments of that fight. Muhammad Mokaev is a minus 1400 favorite. That's insane, man. So there's quite a bit of good underdog picks here. You have Volkan Oezdemir, you have Charles Oliveira, you have TJ Dillashaw, and you also have Mahmoud Muradov. Any of these fighters could win their fights, and they're all underdogs. And I'll have to say your lock of the card, number 1 is Muhammad Mokaev, of course. I believe Mateusz Gamrot is a pretty safe pick. The other guy that stands out is probably Abu Bakr and Armen Petrosyan. Those are pretty good locks as well. So there's a lot of underdogs that could win on this card, and that means there's a lot for you to win as well. And all you gotta do is go to mybookie.ag and sign up for the deposit bonus, where they'll match up your first deposit all the way up to $1,000. You put in 100, they give you another 100 to play with. They're gonna ask you for the promo code, and make sure to use Weasel. That's WEASLE to activate this offer. Make sure to visit mybookie.ag today, where you can win big. And ultimately, that's the end of the predictions, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, make sure to give this a thumbs up, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video.